Hi, and welcome to the Writers After Dark How to Install and Use Macros for More Efficient Revisions. Macros are a great and easy way to assist in your revision process, and you don't need to be a programmer to use or install these powerful shortcuts. But before we get started, we're going to give you a quick demonstration on how these macros can guide you to writing more powerful fiction by identifying things like needless, passive, and telling words. Here is an example. It's the first version of a short story called The Blue Vase. Running the macros, you can see highlighted all the needless, passive, or telling words that are contained on page 1. Since one of the biggest writing challenges is seeing individual issues in our own writing, macros provide an easy and effective way to point them out for you. Then, by using them as a guide, you can hone your focus on the potential problems. Here's what the document looks like after the revisions have been completed and we've rerun the macros. The best part of using macros is they can help identify issues so you can focus on creating more powerful and meaningful sentences. And adding in the essential writer macros is easy. We've done the hardest part by curating the 4 most critical macro scripts for you. All you're going to need to do is cut and paste them into your Word program, and that's what we're going to do next. Your macro cheat sheet contains 4 macros. We're going to be installing just 3 of the 4 today: needless words, passive words, and remove all highlights function. But before we begin, make certain you first visit writersafterdark.net/downloads and either download the Word document containing the macros or copy and paste them to your own Word document or text editor. Also, to make it easier, you might want to save this document to your desktop or in a file that will be easy to locate because you'll be going back and forth between this file and your Word document. Okay, now that you have the file, we're ready to get started. Your first step is to open a Word document. It's best to use a document that already has some writing in it so you can test your macros right away. For document safety, however, create a copy of whichever document you're going to use so that you always have a backup copy. Now open your test document and find the macro feature in Word. I'm using Word for Mac. If you're using the Microsoft PC version or an older version such as 2003 or 2007, you may have to hunt around a bit. But once you locate the macro function, everything else is exactly the same for all versions of Word. Usually, you can find the macros feature either here on the ribbon under View or by going to the main menu and selecting the Tools option. In the View option, select View, and in the Tools option, select Macros. Once you've done that, the Macros box will open up. You want to ensure your drop-down here is set to Normal Global Template. This way, the macros we enter will be available in all other Word documents, and you'll only need to do this process once. If this is your first time using macros, this area is probably blank. You'll also notice that the Add and Delete buttons aren't functional. Unlike a Word document, macros require you create a name before you can create the macro. So let's name our first macro. We'll call it Needless Words, and then we'll hit the plus sign. So what went wrong? Well, another macro quirk is that there can't be any spaces between characters in the macro name. So we'll just return to our view and this time add needless words without the space. After naming your macro, use the plus sign or hit the enter key on your keyboard, and you'll see this new space open up. It may look a little scary, but it's not, and trust me, you can't cause any damage here. This is where you'll paste our pre-written macro script for needless words. Notice also the words sub and end sub text already are in place. These words are just program language that tells the computer to start doing something and then when to stop doing something. Your macro instructions always go between these 2 words. Since our macros already have these sub and end sub instructions, we can delete these before we copy and paste. And then we go to our macro script sheet to get the instructions for needless words. Because your macro cheat sheet contains all the macros we're adding, be sure to only copy and paste them one at a time. That is, create a new macro name and repeat this process for all 4 of the macros. So we'll simply copy everything for a single macro starting with the word sub and ending with the words end sub. Now we'll return to our Word document and paste this text into the box. It drives me crazy that there's no save button, but trust me, it does automatically save your macro instructions. At this point, we have 2 options. We can immediately run the macro from this screen by selecting the Run button here at the bottom, or you can close out and run it later from the macro drop-down menu. Let's run ours from the drop-down menu so we can see that it worked. In this document, all the highlighted words are the ones considered needless. Of course, the macro is only selecting words pre-selected in the program script that you copied into it. If you want to change or add words to the script, it's simple enough to do in the editor. Now we're going to add the passive word macro. Again, we select macro, and this time we can see that needless words is already selected. In order to add our new macro, we need to create a new name. Just select and delete needless words from this selection area. It won't delete your needless word macro, but if you don't rename it, you will overwrite the needless word macro. Now type in passive words and remember, no spaces. You can see that the new macro is being added below our first one. Macros don't need separate files because of these words sub and nsub. And again, those two words were automatically added, and since we know they're already in the other file, we can just remove them. Now go back to your macro script sheet, find passive words, and copy from sub to nsub. Return to your document and paste it in. Now to test it, we return to our main document, select macros, select passive words, and hit run. And there it is, a new set of highlights in a new color. As a side note, you can look at the macro scripts and change the color or add or delete words the macro highlights. Just be careful because scripts are sensitive. If you make changes that don't work, just delete the macro and recopy it again from your cheat sheet. Our next macro is important because it will save you time later in document preparation. Some of the highlighted words you'll want to keep in your final document. Obviously, we aren't going to remove every occurrence of was. So ultimately, you'll want an easy way to remove all these highlights from the words that remain. You could simply use the select all function and remove them here, but an easier method is to use a macro that does the work for you. The one thing you have to keep in mind though is when you run this macro, all the highlights within your document will be removed, not just the ones created by the macros you entered. So to add the remove highlights macro, we repeat our process. Open your macro view, ensure you remove any name that appears in this bar, type in remove highlights with no spaces. You can of course name it anything you want. Hit the plus key, remove these two new sub and nsub scripts, copy the macro instructions from your master file, and paste into your new macro here. Again, you can run it now or return to it later. Just to demonstrate, we'll run it now. And that's it. Now when we open a new document and select macros and search for our global macros, all of the things we've entered will appear in this box. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, just send us an email at writersafterdark@gmail.com, and be sure to visit writersafterdark.net for more tips, advice, podcasts, and videos on the writing craft.